Imagine a tent in the heat of the desert, its canvas flickering in a wind that smells of dust and myrrh. Inside, wrapped in cloth and gold, sits a chest the size of a child's coffin, a box that thrums with a presence people call holy, and that, according to the stories, can strike a man dead. For the Israelites, the Ark of the Covenant was both the visible sign of the Lord's presence and an object to be feared. It was worshipped, escorted with music and sacrifice, yet it demanded protocols so strict that a single impulsive touch proved fatal. This paradox, an object venerated as divine presence and treated like a contained, dangerous technology, lies at the center of the story we will trace. The biblical text is straightforward about the ark's origin and material. God instructs Moses to fashion a chest of acacia wood and overlay it with pure gold, with rings at the corners and poles threaded through them. On top sits the mercy seat, a solid slab of gold with two cherubim facing one another. The ark is not decorative bling. It is the locus of covenantal memory. The tablets of the law, a jar of manna, and Aaron's budding rod are set inside or associated with it as tokens of God's covenantal acts. Functionally, it stands at the center of Israel's sanctuary life. It sits in the Holy of Holies, guarded by curtains, and approaches to it are governed by law and ritual. To approach the ark historically is to approach ritual, law, and presence. The Levites were assigned the duty of care. They transported the tabernacle's instruments, carried the ark with poles through rings, and performed the music and sacrifices that accompanied it. The high priest alone answered the presence of that lid once a year, on the Day of Atonement, with incense and the blood of sacrifices. These practices created distance and mediated contact. They are not incidental details, they are protocols. Taken together, they read like a system designed to regulate a potentially overwhelming force. We might describe that system in modern terms as a kind of containment procedure, a ritual engineering that managed access between the human and the divine. If this exploration is drawing you in, consider subscribing to follow the full documentary series. Later episodes will examine technical analogies and archaeological contexts in greater depth. What was inside the ark matters for how to imagine its function. The text names three primary associations: the stone tablets from Sinai, a jar of manna, and the rod of Aaron that budded. On one level, these are memorial objects, reminders of God's provision, law, and chosen priesthood. But read through another lens that takes ritual and symbolism seriously, these items function as a body of evidence about Israel's identity, failure, and divine selection. The tablets are the authoritative standard and the record of covenant. The manna is the trace of miraculous provision in the wilderness and a tangible reminder that life itself was sustained by God's hand. Aaron's rod, which sprouted buds, is a sign confirming the legitimate sacerdotal line. Far from being trophies, they stand as proofs that demand respect and that, in the logic of covenant, implicate a people before the holy. This interpretive frame leads to a striking image: the ark as a repository of incriminating evidence. When the community failed, these tokens would not absolve them automatically. Instead, they serve as a confrontation with a standard the people have not kept. The ark in this reading is less a museo case than a sealed file, an object that holds testimony and thus needs care in its custody. To handle it casually would be to mishandle testimony itself. The most visually arresting feature of the ark is its lid, the mercy seat or propitiatory, flanked by two cherubim. The biblical rituals around this spot, especially on the Day of Atonement, are central to any reading of function. Once a year, the high priest entered the innermost chamber, carried incense to cloud the space, and sprinkled sacrificial blood on the mercy seat. In the sacrificial imagination of Israel, blood marks, covers, and mediates. The blooded act on the mercy seat symbolically bridges human guilt and divine holiness, permitting the nation a renewed relationship with the Lord. Viewed through an engineering metaphor, and here we must be careful to label this as hypothesis rather than fact, the mercy seat and annual rites can be seen as components of a containment ritual. The idea is not that priests were operating pumps and valves, but that ritual protocols functioned like safety procedures. Only one authorized person, equipped with the required purity and detailed rites, could approach the most dangerous locus of the sanctuary. The blood as containment language is a theological image with ritual weight. It promises reconciliation while at the same time instituting strict limits on access. To repeat plainly, this is an interpretive analogy to a modern containment system, not a scientific proof that the ark was literally a technological device. The biblical narratives contain a string of dramatic episodes that underscore the ark's perilous presence. Each story contributes to the sense that this is not merely a sacred box, but a force that can upset natural and social orders. Consider the case of Uzzah. During David's transfer of the ark to Jerusalem, the oxen bearing the cart stumble, and the ark begins to shift. Uzzah reaches out to steady it. The text reports that the Lord struck him down for touching the ark, and he died there. The narrative treats his death as grim instruction. Contact with the holy requires obedience to the Lord's commands. Historically and theologically, the tale functions as a warning about presumption before the divine. Interpreted through the containment lens, the incident emphasizes the necessity of proper handling procedures. The point is not to enjoy a story of divine wrath, but to see how the tradition insists on measured, regulated engagement with the presence. The crossing of the Jordan, as narrated in Joshua, reads like a ritualized experiment. As the priests carrying the ark step into the river, the water piles up, and the people pass over on dry ground. The ark is presented as an agent that temporarily alters natural conditions to enable passage. If one adopts a technological analogy, this looks like a controlled intervention. The presence of the ark creates conditions that suspend the river's flow. Again, this is a faith report. The text attributes the miracle to the Lord. And when framed as an analogy, it suggests an object whose operation interacts with the environment in decisive ways. Jericho follows with an even more dramatic demonstration. The ark precedes the people around the city's walls as they march, and at the sound of trumpets and a cry, the walls collapse. The narrative links the ark's presence and ritual action with a structural failure in the city. As an interpretive image, some commentators suggest resonance or hydraulic metaphors to explain how ritual and sound might contribute to undermining foundations. Others insist this is purely a divine act that dispenses with natural explanations. Both readings live side by side. The scripture reports a miracle, and some modern analogies attempt to imagine mechanisms that would make the event fit known physical processes. These analogies must be treated carefully and never presented as proof. A different set of episodes shifts the scene from Israel to Philistine towns, showing that the ark's agency is not constrained by the boundaries or intentions of its keepers. In 1 Samuel, the Philistines capture the ark and set it in the temple of their god Dagon. The image that follows is unsettling. The idol of Dagon falls before the ark, its head and hands broken off, prostrate on the threshold. Then, instead of exploiting their prize, the Philistine cities are visited by plagues and tumors. They pass the ark from one house to another seeking relief. And when the trouble persists, they finally send the ark back with offerings. These episodes suggest that the ark embodies a force that resists being domesticated as spoil. The object carries effects that are not simply beneficial in isolation. Removed from its cultic context and handled by those who do not know its rituals, it becomes an irritant, a destabilizer. Taken together, these narratives build the portrait of an artifact that is sacred, authoritative, and dangerous, an object that requires specialized knowledge and ritual to manage. Ritual is not superstition here, it is protocol. The Levites' transportation rules, poles through rings, carrying rather than dragging, and a prohibition on casual touching are not incidental etiquette. They are safety instructions embedded in a religious system. Yet the ark's physical trail narrows after the Babylonian capture of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. The historical record from the exilic period is marked more by silence about the ark than by clarity. Nebuchadnezzar's forces take the temple's treasures. The city is razed. The biblical inventories list many captured items, but the ark vanishes from the administrative trail. This absence has spawned a variety of historical and legendary responses. One tradition, preserved in the deuterocanonical text of 2 Maccabees, recounts that Jeremiah foresaw the coming disaster and hid the ark in a cave on Mount Nebo, commanding that its location remain secret until God gathers his people again. This account is not part of the primary Jewish and Protestant collections of Scripture, but it preserves an early memory and offers a theological explanation. The ark was hidden, preserved until a future restoration. Another line of claim comes from the Ethiopian tradition, most prominently recorded in the Kebra Nagast, which asserts that the ark was transported to Aksum and remains there to this day. The Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum insists that it houses the original ark, jealously guarded and rarely seen. Both accounts are part of a patchwork of memory, devotion, and politics. They carry powerful cultural and religious weight, but their historical evidence ranges from weak to legendary rather than conclusive. Scholars have proposed other scenarios: that the ark was destroyed in the sack of the city, that it was taken to Babylon and lost in the imperial hordes, or that it was dismantled and its gold appropriated. Each hypothesis must deal with the steady silence of the administrative records and the shifting theological priorities of later Israelite religion. What is clear is that by the Second Temple period, the physical ark had receded from common cultic practice. The memory remained, but the object itself ceased to be the focal point it once was. That theological shift prepares us for a final, decisive reconfiguration recorded in the Christian scriptures. At the crucifixion, the temple curtain, the veil that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies, is torn in two from top to bottom. Gospel writers present this tearing as cosmic sign. The barrier separating humanity from the immediate presence of God is removed. In theological terms, what the ark mediated, access to the presence, is now symbolically open for all through a new mode of relationship. If one reads the ark as an instrument for containing and managing the encounter with the divine, the torn veil can be read as the moment when that particular form of mediation becomes theologically obsolete. That does not reduce the ark's historical or ritual importance. Rather, it reframes its role in salvation history. Throughout this exploration, we must keep 2 commitments. First, when we retell the biblical narratives, we must preserve their sequence and essential outcomes. The ark is created in the wilderness, it travels with Israel, it participates in miraculous events, it causes danger when mishandled, it is captured and later disappears from view. Second, when we offer technological or engineering metaphors, we must do so as interpretation, imaginative and informed, but speculative. Terms like containment, protocol, or even agent can be illuminating, as long as we do not conflate metaphor with proof. Saying that the ark functions like a containment system is not the same as saying it was a machine in modern terms. What might be gained by reading the ark through a technological lens? First, it clarifies why ritual detail matters. Protocols are not arbitrary. They preserve relationship and prevent catastrophe, whether spiritual or social. Second, it helps modern readers grasp the tangible seriousness of ancient worship. For Israel, the sacred was not merely symbolic, but had behavioral and communal consequences. Finally, the analogy invites interdisciplinary conversation among theologians, historians, and engineers about how ancient communities managed forces they experienced as overwhelming. Where does that leave us regarding the ark's fate and function? The precise material history after the Babylonian conquest remains opaque. Traditions of hiding and transfer preserve theological longings and local claims. Interpretations that imagine technical mechanisms offer provocative ways to connect ancient texts with contemporary sensibilities about control, containment, and risk. But none of these interpretations displace the theological core of the biblical witness. The ark signifies that God dwelt among a people and that holiness demands reverence. When the veil is torn, the underlying claim is that access to the divine is reconfigured in a way that renders the old mediation unnecessary. Our journey from the tent in the desert to the quiet of Axum and the torn curtain at the cross is a journey across genres: law, ritual, history, legend, and theology. Each mode contributes a piece of the puzzle. To call the Ark a hidden technology is provocative and useful, but it must remain a controlled hypothesis, a lens that highlights certain features while leaving others in shadow. For believers, scholars, and curious viewers alike, the Ark continues to pose urgent questions. How do humans encounter the holy? How do communities manage forces they cannot fully comprehend? And what do we do when our instruments for access become obsolete? If you want to follow this series further, we explore technical analogies and archaeological contexts in the next episode, including a careful look at ancient transport technologies and sanctuary architecture. Subscribe to continue the investigation and to join us as we weigh evidence, symptoms, and traditions with both respect and critical care. Whatever one believes about the Ark's ultimate whereabouts or the literal mechanics of its power, the texts compel us to treat the subject with reverence and nuance. The story is not simply about a lost treasure or a mysterious machine. It is about a people, their encounter with the divine, and the costly protocols that shape communal life in the presence of what is holy.